Hey friends, before we dive in, I wanted to take a moment just to welcome you to the very first episode of The Capitalist Hippie. It is the name that is replacing someone like you. So if you've been following along on LinkedIn, you might have caught a few name ideas that I was testing, and if you've been listening closely, you probably noticed a shift, more context, more clarity, and more real talk about what it means to build in this moment. That was intentional. This show started as someone like you, and if you've been with us since this chapter, thank you. That spirit is still here, but the new name, The Capitalist Hippie, gets us closer to what the podcast is really about. Founders, operators, and investors using sustainability not as a footnote, but as fuel. Because this moment we're in is not just urgent, it's unprecedented. We're looking at the largest economic opportunity of our generation. The people we feature are the ones who are building the next economy. They are bending the rules strategically, creating new advantages, and proving that integrity and ambition can scale side by side. Same spirit, new name, same goal to help you build the future you believe in with more candor, more context, and more opportunities. So, without further ado, here's the first episode of The Capitalist Hippie. Sometimes the most powerful market opportunities are the ones hiding in plain sight. This week, I spoke with the two leaders of Photon Marine, people who are electrifying one of the last frontiers in clean transportation. Not cars, not trucks, but boats. And not just any boats, working boats. But this conversation isn't a deep dive into battery specs or motor design. It's about the business of building a climate startup, from raising capital to choosing the right market, balancing risk, and knowing when to say no. If you're into the intersection of startup creativity and investment level thinking, this one's for you.
We realized that commercial boaters, which use their outboard engines more frequently, had an opportunity to electrify that traditional recreational boaters did not. They use their outboard motors, 1,000 to 1,500 hours per year, versus the average recreational boater maybe uses their systems 50 to 100 hours per year. They're also typically operating on repeatable routes. So they'll leave from the same port or marina or dock, and then they go to the same sort of work area, whether that's in tourism, where they're maybe going whale watching or snorkeling, or marine enforcement or water taxi operations, and they come back to that same boat slip. And in commercial, typically those boat slips, whether again small port or marina or larger one, they have access to electricity.
Welcome to The Capitalist Hippie, the podcast where we challenge the old rules of business to build something better. I'm Marco Pimentel, marketing expert, entrepreneur, and lover of bold, sustainable ideas. Every week, we dive into data-backed insights, groundbreaking ideas, and real-world strategies that help you outthink and outmaneuver the status quo.
We see some of these initial customers are committing to 1 to 2 vessels as pilot programs with a greater possibility of a full fleet conversion. And that is another reason why we've gone to market approaching commercial over recreation, because these relationships are not one-offs or individual customers, but fleet customers that we can have long-term relationships with, supporting not only the initial sale, but the software that allows them to effectively and efficiently manage their electric vessels and maintenance, and having that relationship not be simply transactional, but formative in how we shift the market towards electric.
This episode is packed with insight from capital strategy and go-to-market decisions to what it takes to build something ambitious in a tough sector. We talk about what's working, what they've had to walk away from, and why focus might be the most underrated startup advantage. Let's get into it. Excited to have Marcelino and Alana here from Photon. There's a lot of excitement for me. I live on the west coast of Canada. I do a lot of fishing, fly fishing. I've spent a lot of time boating. And so I love being around marinas. I love being around boats. And I wanted to kind of just start with the why. Why start with a business, building a different motor and electrification? You see cars are moving towards that, but you see a little bit of a lag with boats being able to do that. And so why start with electric engines?
Hi, I'm Marcelino. Excited to be here, CEO of Photon Marine. And when we set out on this journey, one of the things that we wanted to do was to understand really the ins and outs of marine electrification. And for us, we realized that commercial boaters, which use their outboard engines more frequently, had an opportunity to electrify that traditional recreational boaters did not. And that stemmed from a few reasons. The first is they use their outboard motors, 1,000 to 1,500 hours per year, versus the average recreational boater maybe uses their systems 50 to 100 hours per year. They're also typically operating on repeatable routes. So they'll leave from the same port or marina or dock, and then they go to the same sort of work area, whether that's in tourism, where they're maybe going whale watching or snorkeling, or marine enforcement or water taxi operations, and they come back to that same boat slip. And in commercial, typically those boat slips, whether again small port or marina or larger one, they have access to electricity. The other thing, and this is particularly true in places like Canada and the States, the commercial operators are either eligible for incentives or are seeing the push for electrification purely driven by a total cost of ownership model. And so we see, even without incentives, really reasonable payback periods for electrification in commercial marine versus recreational. So, for us, we looked at the market when we were getting underway and realized that no one was targeting the commercial outboard owners. B, no one was delivering a propulsion pack at the time that was really capable of pushing the vessels that those operators are using from, typically the vessels are from 18 to 40 feet. And C, no one had really thought about how to optimize those systems, both from a hardware and software perspective, to meet the demands of that commercial customer. And so, fast forward a few years, there's certainly others that are looking at the electrification space. But again, one of the things that has held true from the beginning is that we're focused exclusively on those commercial operators, and truly trying to understand what their day-to-days look like to inform both hardware and software product design decisions. So for us, honestly, it was a no-brainer. It pencils out for commercial marine, and we just saw an opportunity where others were really ignoring a pretty large market segment.
This is a textbook example of overlooked climate leverage. Because these boats run constantly, fuel is a top operating cost, and every hour saved with electric is money in the bank. Photon is betting on this imbalance to drive real traction faster than most sectors in electrification. Yeah, and we'll unpack that side as well, the go-to-market, because I think you said a lot of stuff there that's super interesting on the benefits and the why commercial is super applicable for this technology to take off. What was the original thesis? Were you sitting at a marina? Were you used to work at a boat shop? What was your background that led you to think, yeah, I think I should electrify outboard boat engines and go after this commercial market?
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong boater. I grew up in South Florida. I spent my summers in the Florida Keys, above and below the water. Professionally, I've had three sections to my career. Early on, I worked for a startup, and that was right around the original .com bubble. And so when that imploded, I stumbled into advertising, where I was fortunate enough to work for two of the world's top creative ad agencies, along some really brilliant creative minds. And I parlayed that into a product design studio that I started back in 2010 called Uncorked Studios. And at Uncorked, we built mobile apps, and we built Internet of Things, so connected devices and interfaces for screens. And it was a really great opportunity to work with innovation teams across some of the world's top technology companies. But I was always an arm's length removed from the actual product. We would create these really cool technologies and then hand them off to someone else to run them. And so I was fortunate to be able to sell Uncorked to a larger consultancy back in 2019. And in the sort of following ensuing months, a number of things happened that hit a reset button on my life. The first was the pandemic hit, which certainly shifted the relationship between work and home. Secondly, we had two little ones, and we're expecting a third on the way. And so I think the relationship between work and home and purpose all really took a greater meaning for me around that time. And I reached out to a friend of mine who's one of our co-founders, and his background is in fisheries nonprofits, and we were just talking about technology that could be really transformational. And one of the things that we talked about was the electrification of outboard motors, and it was a light bulb moment for me, truly, that here's an opportunity to perhaps combine three things that I'm incredibly passionate about: being, on the boat and enjoying the water, building hardware and hardware enabled technologies, and designing beautiful, simple interfaces that could connect those two. And so it checked a few boxes that I needed, both personally and professionally, and that was sort of the impetus. Now we needed to build a team, and so around that time, I reached out to a mutual connection that I had here in Portland, whose background was working in the apparel and outdoor industry, and he connected us to our CTO. And his background is electric motorcycles, and we had a conversation early on around the opportunities, but also the challenges around marine electrification, specifically that pushing a boat through the water is about 5 times harder than pushing a car on land. And so he's like, hey, you have to find a really good use case that makes sense for this. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I always appreciate both a business challenge and an engineering challenge, and this was both. And at that time, I said, well, I could just learn about what is working in other industries to really kind of develop a hypothesis for what Photon could be. And it was still pandemic era, and around that time, we could attend a number of conferences virtually, and most of them were free. And so I signed up for pretty much every electrification conference that I could find, and just listened to case studies of electrification, from fleet electrification to school bus electrification to municipal bus electrification, tractors, you name it. And the school bus and municipal bus electrification really stood out as a business model, both in terms of public-private partnership, the impact from a greenhouse gas emissions reduction perspective, the reasonable payback periods, the way that you could plan charging and battery sizing around a known discrete use case, and kind of went back to the original hypothesis of maybe targeting commercial fishers in the Caribbean, and said, well, that might not be the best use case to start, but we were close. Commercial, anything that looks like a bus on the water would be an excellent place for us to look at. And so we made our original list back then of water taxis, whale watching operators, pilot vessels, marine enforcement, seafood, aquaculture, mariculture type applications, hydrography, undersea scanning. And so one of the earliest theses that we had was that the place to play for this industry was in commercial. And we've certainly learned a lot on the hardware side and a lot on the software side since then. But one of the things that has absolutely held true from the earliest days is that hypothesis. And I think we've certainly, in terms of the customer segments that we're receiving a lot of interest from, have validated that in the years since.
Most marine startups go straight for the recreational market. Weekend warriors, boat shows, big lifestyle branding. But that path can be slow, fragmented, and brand-driven. Photon chose commercial instead. Why? Because the problems are bigger, the usage is more intense, and the ROI is easier to prove. It's a more demanding customer, but a better fit for a startup that needs fast validation. Yeah, and we'll bring Alana into the conversation as well. I'm very curious how you, or why you were drawn to join Photon, and what got you so excited about kind of the market opportunity and the kind of the go-to-market opportunity considering your role.
Yeah, so my name's Alana Kambury. I am the Director of Operations, and I joined Photon about 2 years ago as a contractor. I had previously met Marcelino in the social impact community, entrepreneur community of Portland, and we had been tracking each other's work. And in that time, I had worked for Rivian as well. So that was my first step into the world of EV mobility and transportation. And when I wrapped up at Rivian, I got a call from Marcelino, and here he is working on electrifying commercial boating. And I had not worked in the maritime world, but as a whitewater boater, I very much appreciated the notion of how we can, create cleaner environments for a greater variety of boating, and helped Photon in 2003 launch with its first boat at the Miami Boat Show. And we kept in touch, and I was brought on again for last November's New Orleans International Workboat Show with the current boat that we're featuring. And I'd been working with other clients generally around business development and experiences, but really wanted to expand my own work around culture and organization. And when Marcelino invited me to stick around full time, I was honored to do so, both because it isn't products for just product's sake. It is a tool for commercial operators that has, the immediate obvious benefits for ecological sustainability, but also safety for crews, both in the short term and also long term for noise pollution, not only affecting our ecosystems, but our crews and our teams out in the commercial world. And the team itself that Marcelino had been building was brilliant, passionate people that not only care about building a good product, but showing up to work with an attitude that is collaborative and curious and willing to, step outside the comfort zone, not only of their own thought processes, but in the maritime world, things that, is uncommon in what we're seeing in this industry. So while there is a few folks on the team that had come from a background of boats, many of us don't. And we're learning a lot along the way about while introducing technology and hardware that is brand new, and seeing the look on folks around the marina when they see our boat pull up and it's quiet. There's nothing better.
Yeah. And so let's maybe break that down a little bit too, just because I think, right now there's lots of different type of engines, there's lots of different commercial, there's lots of different recreational types of boats. And so immediately you think there's an environmental aspect here, that these boats are not using fuel, they're electrified. But there's a whole other host of things that come into owning an engine, owning a boat, and from maintenance to, the spillage into the ocean, not only just the gas that you're using, how long does it last, how do you do all these different things? And so when you're breaking down this kind of go to market and like this kind of like, this is what the market's going to kind of be really gravitated towards, is there any surprises there when you started to talk to customers? Like what is, like, there's this idea with climate solutions and climate businesses or sustainability focused ones that really at the end of the day, you need to go to the customer with a solution that's the same, if not better. And obviously in an ideal situation, it's just better, right? Was there any surprises there that you got from customers early on or now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Coming from going to school for sustainability and social impact in business, one thing that was driven through in our program is great if you have an idea that could change the world either socially or environmentally. But if it isn't a good business or it isn't a good quality product, it's not worth it. Like as altruistic as you might hope it to be. So that said, creating a product that we know where the upfront costs are higher than traditional motors, we needed to show not only that the investment has cost parity in a reasonable timeline, but that as we introduce the product, both the cost parity, but also the user experience. So things that surprised me, as I mentioned in safety, learning how we've heard anecdote stories and narratives from sea crews that have been out being transported around on outboard motors for decades, saying, if this existed in my lifetime, I wouldn't have hearing issues. Like that alone was humbling to hear, and that to know that this is not only good for the environment, but it could create health benefits that have a rippling effect across an entire company. When crews can have safe conversations to and from work sites while being on the boat, when they're not they're getting to spend resources and training for things that elevate the business versus how to fix an outboard motor. The advantages of this electric motor, similar to the case made for EV cars, is there's less maintenance and overhead costs. So, we see use cases in tourism, whale watching tours that I think are obvious, that not only is there the marketing play that, hey, we're using these electric outboard motors and it's polluting not only the immediate environment, but the greater environment by using less fossil fuels and not being gas tank, but that the customer experience through less noise pollution and the lack of diesel smells and off gas is there. And I think some of those are going to be really clear out of the gate. And the ones that we'll see from surveillance, municipalities, port operations, construction, there is the stories I'm looking forward to learning of how it affects crew members' lives and safety, which is going to make a greater case beyond just the environmental impact.
I thought that was a phenomenal answer. I mean, I think, again, it's collecting those anecdotal stories that Alana's talking about and turning them into an overall narrative. And we're really looking forward to getting the product in people's hands to be able to qualify that.
I've been fortunate enough to try a consumer electric boat. A friend of mine has it. At the same time, they were also able to put power towards their dock, which is not a normal consumer. Not many consumer opportunities like that exist. And so, but what I saw was a boat that was incredibly quiet. It was beautifully smooth. It was, just easy to use. Infrastructure, everything. Just it was just better. And the issue there, of course, is you have to go from changing. The use cases of a wakeboarding boat versus a commercial boat are so different, which is what's so smart about what you're trying to do and the market that you're trying to go after. So you have this idea, you're going to build electric engines and boats that with both software and a hardware approach, which is obviously, a big part of it as well. How did you get off the ground to start building this? Hardware businesses are expensive. Software businesses take, resources and people as well. How did you get this funded and how did you get that started?
So I used to run a product design consultancy. And so I think one of the things that was really instrumental early on in Photon's day and still carries to this day is to pull in resources from my previous lifetime to help contribute. And I think it is tempting as a venture-backed startup to hire a ton of people, grow, and spend money. But we chose a different path. We wanted to be frugal, and we wanted to intentionally focus in certain areas of innovation versus trying to take on everything. And I think the market has matured a little bit. I think we're still in the early days, but it's matured enough that we can see that was also a good bet to make because a number of the companies that had outraised us are no longer in existence because they spent money at a faster rate than what they had raised. And perhaps they took on too much technical risk and weren't able to overcome all that technical risk out of the gate. So for us, we have been very thoughtful and methodical about where we invest our internal time and where we pull in resources to work alongside us. And again, a lot of that came from my early days in running a product design studio. The company itself is venture backed, and we're fortunate that we had a number of connections here in the Portland area that were investors, and were able to support our early vision, and we were able to parlay that into introductions to larger investors in the area, larger investors in the region, and then a number of investors across the U.S. and internationally as well. So we're right now in the process of raising our Series A, but we've up until that point had closed a seed round of funding back in December of 23 that has really propelled us through the innovations that we've undertaken. And again, it's just a matter of focusing on certain aspects of the product and where we want to design. And for us, that's really on the propulsion stack. And that's really where we've been looking at versus perhaps redesigning a throttle or trying to compete with Garmin to redesign a screen. Those seemed like unnecessary areas to spend engineering efforts out of the gate versus having a business relationship with a supplier that can achieve the scale. And so fundamentally, that comes down to uh, having a risk profile from an engineering and business perspective that allowed us to continue to move the organization forward. And as we validate hypotheses or validate areas of efficiency, we can certainly spend more into those areas to continue to expand. But that's allowed us to get to market quickly. We got underway in 2022, and we'll be bringing products to market this year that have been informed through 6, and it'll be 7 design iterations on the main product line by the time it hits market. And that was because we spent all our effort in a few areas focusing.
Saying no to early pilots is brutally hard, especially when you're a startup hungry for traction. But this is one of Photon's smartest moves. Every deployment is a data engine. A misaligned pilot burns engineering time, fragments product focus, and muddies the story. By staying tight on their strategic fit, they've protected their learning loop and positioned themselves for deeper customer relationships. To talk about the marketing side, so how did you get initial interest and to the product? Like, obviously it's unique, it's different. I think people see it, they're just intrigued, and you can go watch some awesome YouTube videos that you guys have. You mentioned boat shows. Walk me through kind of what's worked and how you've taken this to market, and what type of customers right now do you have engaged that are waiting for boats?
Yeah, so with the technology and with this product that for an industry that trails automotive by 10 to 12 years, being in person with a boat has been what carries from a concept or a theory into something that's real and now. That this isn't a future thing we're discussing and a what if. It is getting folks out on the water at events, shows, trade shows, ideally that are work boat or commercial boat operator specific, and getting them out on the water. And when we have and are able to share that experience of that first moment when the motors turn on and their eyes get so big because it's quiet, it doesn't smell, and we're able to not even raise our voice a single decibel and continue the conversations we're having, that's when it sinks in that this is technology that exists now, that we're at market now, and it's not a what if or a prototype for the future. So the being in person again, and also post-COVID, like people are hungry for experiences that they can touch, they can feel, they can be out on the water, they can meet the team, they can see that, our captain Jake is behind the wheel as well, and he has 20 years behind the wheels of commercial boats, and that, he's here vouching for the product as well. That those interactions are what is really driving the adoption of the brand and the technology and our product, and the enthusiasm and the support that we're getting from both the maritime community, but the clean tech and the climate impact community. And that enthusiasm is the wind beneath our sails.
If you think about just kind of revenue, and if you think about the next kind of like 3 to 5 years, obviously you're doing a raise right now, so that means that you have some goals that you want to drive towards. Is the idea to continue to build boats and engines together? Is it hopefully to have engines that can just go on other people's boats at some point? Like, what's the next growth that you are hoping to do with this round of funding?
Absolutely. And you touched upon a couple of things. So obviously boat builders are a huge partner for us in the commercialization of our technology. And so we have been thoughtful in building relationships with boat builders that already serve commercial use cases, and thoughtful about both the regions that they operate in, but also the technologies and approaches that they have for their vessel designs. And so That can mean an aluminum workboat monohull that might be made by like a group like Silverback Marine in Tacoma, Washington, which is part of our flagship product, but also a carbon fiber hull that's a catamaran made by Ghostworks Marine in Holland, Michigan. It can be a fiberglass, vessel from South Africa that is a catamaran with a fixed wing foil, and everywhere in between. And so for us, continuing to build those relationships with both a desire to explore and do R&D on new hull designs and new ways to increase efficiency in the vessel design and manufacture process is a key part of it. And like Alana said previously, being able to get on the water with both customers and partners and seeing that come to life is a big part of that. So it's just making space to build boats that are applicable by our customer use cases and getting out on the water. Longer term, obviously, in order to hit the broader swath of the market that both investors and we would want to see, we need to have a pathway to supporting retrofits. And the short answer on retrofits is that they're possible in a number of use cases, and there's a few that they aren't. And really, it comes down to the installation of batteries where fuel tanks once were. And there are certainly some hull designs where it is easy to service a fuel tank or remove it and place batteries within there. It's not as easy as doing that, but if there is a serviceable fuel tank in a vessel, that's a pathway towards retrofit. The next part of it is making sure that you're balancing out the center of gravity of the vessel when you do put in batteries in its place. And so our outboards are lighter than traditional outboards, which allows us to go heavier on the battery sizes, but we still need to make sure that the overall vessel is balanced so that it performs when it needs to get up on a plane or needs to drive around an area, or if it's a vessel that is traveling empty but then picks up load because it's used for transport of food or supplies, that the weight can be distributed appropriately and that it can function. So it is not just as easy as removing fuel tanks and placing batteries, but it certainly can get there. And so for us, we don't want to be system integrators. We'll work with commercial retrofit companies to do those installations. And so the next 18 months will involve building relationships with companies that are already servicing commercial customers to repower their vessels and finding pathways to test out which existing hull designs make most sense. And again, there's an area where we have some initial hypotheses around applications that are easy to retrofit, and there's some ones that are definitely not easy to retrofit. And so we'll start with some low-hanging fruit there and then expand outwards as we learn from those initial deployments.
Marine electrification might feel niche, but regulation is about to make it mainstream. Ports around the world are setting zero-emission targets, especially for commercial fleets. California, for example, is already rolling out mandates. So when we talk about timing a market, Photon's not just early, they're aligned with the next regulatory wave. Do you get this feeling that from a customer perspective that there's not really kind of any objection other than just kind of time and cost and understanding how that's going to all play out in this? Because like, why wouldn't you want to run an electric boat versus the alternative that's right now? Like it just seems like, is that the kind of the gut reaction for most people when you speak with them?
Well, there's, you're asking folks to change behavior. And that fundamentally can be one of the hardest obstacles, taking away or replacing something that they're so familiar with, which is their ICE outboard motors, and replacing it with something that operates differently. Even though those operational differences have their advantage, it's still different. And that there is unknowns that we are working on to account for and to make their customer experience feel open and accessible if issues arise. So there is that behavioral change. The upfront costs are going to be higher unless there are state, municipal, or federal grants that can offset and create a parity out of the gate, which is we're seeing in California with their Carb Core program. And otherwise, it is talking them through that use case, depending on the market segment that they're in, that they're going to see a return on their investment within 2 to 3 years in most cases. So it's creating a a future operational vision for them, with them, that is welcoming and not outweighing the level of change that is in front of them. And again, as we've said, the maritime world runs about 10 to 15 years behind automotive. So we're introducing something that, while they've seen it on the roads, it's still new. It's still very new. And the excitement, we're going to have the early adopters, like the New York Power Authority, that have been already leasing out our vessels to support dredging operations, and the Port of Friday Harbor, that is leveraging Washington state grants to electrify 4 of their vessels there. Those early adopters are really the ones that we get to prop up, tell their stories, the advantages of what their electric vessels are providing them, both in financial at their bottom line, but also their crew experience.
Yeah, I see being on in Victoria, we have these things called pickle boats. They're these little water taxis that take people kind of across the harbor, and like use cases like that seem so applicable. But at the same time, you have these whale watching boats nonstop for us. So we're pretty fortunate to have them, but they are using big engines, lots of fuel. At the same time, they're taking you out into nature to see, these killer whales. The irony, and for them, I'm sure that because they have the infrastructure to charge, and they're going back and forth all the time, this is an incredible solution as this starts to develop. How big is this industry when you kind of think holistically? Is there a number that you work towards that this is like a X amount of North American dollars that you're playing in?
Yeah, it's about a $16 billion a year business if you just look at outboard motors. We think that the play is bigger than that because obviously we have software as well. And so the telematics side of marine is probably another $4 to $5 billion on top of that. Across that, you see a split where about half of the industry, 55% is recreational and 45% is commercial. But again, as we've kind of indicated before, we think the play is commercial because of the frequent usage, the fast payback periods, and the ability to apply for incentives on the commercial side. So within that, so it's about 450,000 units going to the commercial side of the house. We see a service obtainable market closer to about 4,500 units per year on the Photon side. That would probably be split about half Western Hemisphere, and then the remainder evenly split across Europe and Asia. And for us, obviously, we need to stay focused and kind of look at what's around us. California, like Alana mentioned, is a big market. Canada, because of its pledges to decarbonize at both the federal level and locally as well, are also big markets for us. And then obviously Central America, Caribbean are big markets because of the year-round seasonality of the boating industry. But we have a number of conversations internationally that are across various bodies of oceanic waters, and we'll be cultivating those over the next 12 to 18 months as well, so that we're not just entirely reliant on the United States and Canada to be the driver of revenue and business. And again, we think there are opportunities in markets that perhaps the GDP is driven by tourism or water transport in a disproportionate way that might move faster towards marine decarbonization because they understand it culturally or regionally in a way that might not necessarily be evident in larger regions such as North America.
And we see some of these initial customers are committing to 1 to 2 vessels as pilot programs, with a greater possibility of a full fleet conversion. And that is another reason why we've gone to market approaching commercial over recreation, because these relationships are not one-offs or individual customers, but fleet customers that we can have long-term relationships with, supporting not only the initial sale, but the software that allows them to effectively and efficiently manage their electric vessels and maintenance, and having that relationship not be simply transactional, but formative in how we shift the market towards electric.
Let's not overlook this. Scaling physical product, supply chain, and fleet support, especially in climate tech, is hard. What Alana is describing is a company growing fast without breaking itself. That operational discipline is what separates flashy ideas from durable businesses. As a founder, there's a question that I have for you around this impact and kind of profit. And, this is a for-profit business that you're trying to drive forward. And if you're successful, which, you have been so far, and obviously you're doing a lot of amazing things to do that, you also become impactful. You're changing waterways, you're making things quieter, you're being more sensitive to the environment, you're not using gasoline, you're using electrification. How much does that play into how you do things, and what kind of drives you? Is it both? Is it more the business side?
It's a complicated one, right? If you wanted to start a philanthropic organization or a nonprofit that just focused on certain aspects of marine decarbonization, you could have a very successful and fruitful career just in that. And if you just wanted to take a pure capitalist take of building electrification of any sector, you could certainly do that. And I think if you tried to look at those in isolation, you could have successful enterprises that achieve their overall objectives. I think for us, there are obviously pragmatic aspects to balancing both a capitalist desire to build something that can be successful and return venture returns, while also having impact that can be transformational in nature to regions that need it the most. And I think for us, it's striking a balance between those two things, and that starts with making sure that our investors are also aligned with a vision that balances those two things. And I think we've been fortunate to cultivate relationships with investors for whom their organizations not only write checks into companies such as ours, but are also doing some of the programmatic work to make sure that this technology gets into the hands of the right customers. And so, a couple that come to mind that I'll call out, but there's certainly a number of them. But we have both Builders Visions and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance as investors in Photon, and both of them are also doing both outreach and programmatic development into marine ecosystems. And so where a startup like us might not necessarily be able to economically sustain a model, where maybe it's the Tom's Shoes model, right? Where for every electric outboard motor sold to a large corporation, we give a free one to someone who needs it. I think working with organizations that are looking through on a much longer time horizon than what is typically expected out of a venture-backed company, to be building the relationships in places that need our technology the most, and making sure that we have the opportunity to get our technology into the right hands. And I'll point to an area where I'm excited about, where I think that balance could be true. We participated a few months ago with the Environmental Defense Fund in the Bahamas, who are looking to explore the possibility to electrify local fly fishing boats that are used by artisanal lodgers and local fly fishers, as well as conch and lobster harvesters, and as well as individuals that are part of the Cascarilla bark harvesting, which is used in the production of Kambury. And so the potential for impact not only includes lowering the cost of operating a vessel in those regions, but also providing solar and charging infrastructure for areas that are at the forefront of climate change and larger hurricanes, but also keeping revenue within a region. And one of the things that came up in the research of the Cascarilla bark was that the people who are harvesting the bark are making $1 or $2 per bushel. People who are collecting the bushels are making $4 to $6 per bushel, but on the open market, the person selling those bushels to the Kambury family are charging several $100s per bushel. And so by looking at the role that electrification could play, and also creating a program to keep more of that revenue locally, you're not only benefiting the environment, you're creating opportunities to really create higher paying jobs for people that are core to a much larger industry. And that's just one example. I think you could make a similar comparison to just the role that electrification can play in creating higher paying jobs for technicians and workforce development, in making marine jobs more accessible to workers that otherwise might not be able to, afford a business. And I think that comes hand in hand with financing programs for electrification, where you could lease an asset before you purchase it. And again, I think we're fortunate that we have investors and partners that are aligned in that vision. And so even if we're not acting like a nonprofit, we can bring groups that are nonprofits that are interested in the impact that our technology can create. And we're certainly able to, spend time both advocating and generating the business models that would support the deployment of our technology into the regions that need it the most.
Alana, Marcelino, that was an incredibly fun conversation. As a fly fisherman and boater, I just, you have to check out this your engines and your boats that you're building. It was a lot of fun to learn about the electrification here. But one thing that kind of just was really interesting is you chose to go the commercial route in terms of your go-to-market strategy. But most startups don't do that, as in they kind of go into the market. They build their thing and they kind of let the market decide, we're going to focus on consumers or commercial, or we're going to focus on all three of them or all five of them. How did you have the diligence and why were you so specific about going after the commercial space, and why did that make sense to do that?
The reason we focused on commercial stemmed from a few areas. First is just there's general knowledge in the marine industry that it tends to lag the automotive industry by 10, sometimes 12 years. And so we were getting underway. We wanted to do some research and understand what could marine electrification learn from the automotive industry that would be applicable to us today. And around the time that we're getting Photon started, we spent quite a bit of time attending electrification conferences and learning about the case studies that were successful in bringing electrification to a particular sector. And at that time, there was a lot of really glamorous, exciting things happening in the automotive electrification space that could have been distractions. The Teslas of the world, the Rivians of the world, GM and Ford jumping into the fray. And I think for us, we wanted to filter some of that signal and noise and understand really where we could see our beachhead. And as we came down to both the opportunity and the challenges for marine electrification, a few things we realized would be true. The first is that you weren't ever going to see incentives for a recreational boater to transition to electric. The second was that on the commercial side, you could get to scale without having to build a large supercharger infrastructure network like you have in automotive, because the behaviors of the customers are out and back. And thirdly, even without incentives, the high cost of marine fuel and the high cost of maintenance was enough to create a very compelling economic reason for why a customer would make a decision. And so we focused on commercial, not because it was a filter or selection or a process of we have to pick amongst these. It was the most obvious choice for electrification. And it's not to say that there's not a point in time at which we might deploy into recreational, but that is a point in time in the future after we've gotten to scale with the commercial use case where we're generating thousands of hours of data per boat, per customer, and our customers have anywhere from one boat to 1,000 boats in their fleet that we can be electrifying. And so for us, it was really a no-brainer, and it's one of those early insights that we've held on to from the beginning that have so far proven to be a valid one, and we'll continue to iterate upon that as we go from where we're at to where we're going.
Yeah, I'll give our VP of engineering is a huge proponent of human-centered design as well. And when you think of the use cases, even though we see about 6 distinct markets in commercial boating, there is behaviors that are similar across all 6 that are unique from recreation. And so when we have, as we're building this team that prioritizes user experience to dilute the both software and hardware and the boating experience to try to appeal to both. Granted, that gives us flexibility. I understand why one would take a broader approach, but this way we're able to create a product with insights specifically from the commercial world that allows for just a higher quality product and a more focused engineering team that has a very, very clear, end goal and prerogative, a motivation. And there is a lot of a lot of activity in the recreation world and very little in the commercial. And that is another appeal. Granted, recreation is sexier and it can be brighter, and you're appealing to folks' emotions. We get to appeal to the bottom line and to safety and to cost conservative financial responsibility, which makes it a more clear use of electrification that is separate from ideologies or philosophies or politics.
So many climate tech startups talk about product first, market second. What I loved about this conversation with Marcelino and Alana is that Photon flipped that. They picked a high-need, high-use customer, the commercial marine operator, and then they built the product around that reality. This isn't just about electrifying boats to help the planet, it's about understanding the business case, the operational pain points, and the timing of a market that's finally ready to shift. Whether you're building software, hardware, or something in between, there's something powerful here about focus, discipline, and knowing who you're really solving for. Thanks for listening to The Capitalist Hippie. If this episode sparked an idea or made you rethink your own strategy, I'd love to hear about it. See you next time.